especially want to thank the Office of Student Life for co-sponsoring this event and making it possible. Thanks to Tom Sheridan. John Russon is going to be talking to us today about sexuality and philosophy. He's coming to us from the University of Guelph in Canada, where he is the Presidential Distinguished Professor of Philosophy. So I'd like to tell you a few things about John. Of course, he's published a lot of articles, especially articles in ancient philosophy and continental philosophy, and he has a lot of books, several of which are on Hegel, since he is a Hegel expert. He's also a jazz guitarist, and he's got his own band that plays in jazz clubs all around Toronto, Canada. He's also a very gifted teacher. So those of us who have been his students can tell you that his approach is a little different from most, and in his classroom, philosophy really comes alive in an extraordinary way. In fact, he's inspired an unusually large number of students to study philosophy, and many of them have gone on to graduate school and become university professors in their own right. Also, and I guess this is the most important thing I want to tell you about John today, he has what I think is a true love of philosophy. A true love of philosophy in the best sense, as wisdom. So you can see this for yourself in his two most recent books, which are actually at the book display on the way in. You might have seen them, and they're also here. Two books. And what's special about the way that John has written these books is that they're written in a way that really breaks out of the mold of traditional academic philosophy. So traditional academic philosophy books are usually written in a way that is primarily for a narrow circle of experts. Whereas these books are written in a way that really seeks to bring powerful ideas to life. Ideas about things like the human body, the family, sexuality, and what it is to be a person. And in them, you can find very beautiful and stunning insights. Things that speak directly to our lives and experiences as human beings. So I highly recommend these books to you, and I'm very happy that we have been able to bring John to speak with us here today. Please welcome John Russon.
My hope is that I can talk without using the microphone. If that turns out not to work, let me know, please. But so I was actually hoping that I would be able to talk with you. I have various things that I want to say, which I wrote in my book. But I was hoping that we could actually interact a bit more. And so I was hoping that you would help me a bit with this first by talking with me about a few things. So I wanted to start. I have three questions in mind that I want to ask, and so I'm hoping that you will indulge me and give me some answers to those questions. It takes a little while to get through them, so we'll talk about those things for a while, and then probably that will work into me saying some of the things that I wanted to say about sexuality. It's a little bit nerve-wracking to stand up in front of a large number of people and talk to them, and so I wanted to ask you about that first because I imagine you've had similar sorts of experiences. So you can either think about your own experiences or you can imagine the experience that I'm probably having right now. But my first question was about that. I wondered if some of you would tell me a little bit about your experience, your sense of what it's like to talk in front of a group, what that feels like, what sorts of issues it raises. So I wonder if anyone would venture a few remarks about that. What the experiences of talking in front of possibly not being mentioned to talk about sexuality start.
Well, I have a different problem. I come from a different culture. I have as you see, I have an accent. So for me, it's a different issue. But obviously, I've never had this problem.
But can you tell me what the issue is?
Well, I think that it's my perspective. I think when I speak, people look at me different. They try to adjust to my accent.
That's great. That's excellent. I want to write that down. I'm going to try to write down a number of these things. I hope people can see it. We'll do the best we can. Can you repeat the thing you said? That you said people about what people the attitude they have there.
It's not the attitude they have. It's that they look at me differently.
Yeah.
It feels like they have even a weird, expression in their face.
Yeah.
But after a while, it vanishes. It goes
That's
away.
interesting. This pen is not very good. Okay. Can other people say things about? Can other people say things about what the experience is like of talking in front of a group? Yeah.
Which one?
Yeah.
Me? In my experiences, I think that a lot of people have a hard time talking in front of groups because everyone looks at them all at once and they think that they're being judged by all these different people.
Yeah.
The amount of language you have to use when talking in front of a group of people changes immensely too. And then the sort of the structure of the sentence, maybe not quite so much the structure, but the type of language you use has to be completely different from the sort of conversational nature of the language where most of the time when you're speaking in front of a group of people.
Okay. So the difference between group language and just general conversational language.
I'm actually sometimes better at talking in front of a group than I am one-on-one conversation. That's just because of work done and done various performances.
Yeah.
So
So-
it's a matter of immersion.
I'm gonna find one of these that works. Just a minute. That one. So, yeah, so in fact, it can be the case that for some people, talking in front of a group might be easier than one-on-one.
Because there's less nuance you have to have.
Well, that's a nice remark. Yeah. So, and perhaps part of the reason for that is because you have to be less concerned about nuances when you're dealing with this. Right. That's good. What else? Yeah.
Speaking in front of people is a really unique experience because it's the only thing that combines anxiety and adrenaline and nervousness all in the same thing. And it's like your heart is pounding after maybe you can ask a question in front of people. It's different.
Yeah, that's a good one. So you said, I'm sure no one can read that except me, but so you said this experience was unique, talking in front of a group, because it brings together anxiety, adrenaline, and nervousness. So I wonder if it's unique in that regard. There might be some other experiences that are like that too. But that's an excellent point. What else? What else can you say? Yeah.
I personally hate speaking in front of groups. It drives me crazy, and I have a job that kind of demands it and a class that requires it. And I tend to be very introverted, so what happens when I speak is a lot of times I'm rethinking the things as I speak. So I'm trying to change my thought, and then as I'm like right now as I'm uttering it, and it starts really kind of sounding stupid to me.
Yep. So I'm going to try to get down a number of those things. So in other contexts, you might feel introverted. So when you're speaking, you start undermining your own speech by sort of have a kind of a critical perspective on what you're saying or something like that, or
Exactly.
yeah. I like this thing you said at the end that you might eventually think that you feel like you sound stupid. You're going to write that down too. Yeah, so it doesn't. I guess I'm not automatically thinking either. Huge group things like this or something, or like teaching in class or something. But maybe if you're in class, maybe you have to give a little presentation, or maybe you have to answer the teacher's question or something like that. So think about those situations too, right? About where you know, not necessarily giving a performance in a sort of formal sense, but just where in a group setting you're called to speak out. I wonder if anybody has any more they can say about that, or what that's like.
Well, it's a little bit different between your experience right now and me experiencing in the class, because I know those people around, kind of. We're in the same social group, you know? There is no barrier between me and my classmates. There is only barrier between me and my professors.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a really good point. So in some situations like that, as like a classroom situation, as opposed to something like this, if you know those people, that makes it feel different. Right? So that seems like an important question in these situations. How well do you know these people? Yeah.
I always hesitate because I feedback. You know what I mean? It's not this, you know, when I talk to one person, it's just level one-on-one. I only have one person to speak to a group. There's a lot more minds, a lot more thoughts going on.
Yep.
It makes me feel more comfortable knowing that a lot more people can maybe add to my knowledge that I ignorant.
Yeah, so it can be quite exciting because you could want the feedback from people, and in fact, more people can be a better thing. So I wonder if we could talk just a little bit more about a particular side of this, and that is the ways in which you might feel uncomfortable if you had to do that. So can you think at all about that, about those sorts of things? Yeah.
I do a lot of public speaking at my work as well, so I feel your pain. But I find that it gets easier over time. The discomfort is really that moment at which, you know, we tend to go through life as sort of silent, and then you're presenting yourself to a group. And so whether it is, you know, talking about a particular topic or just revealing who you are, like in the instance of big public speaking, it feels like you're pretty much just revealing a topic, and that's sometimes easier. It is a little bit like a performance. Whereas when you're in a smaller group, it's more like whether you know the people or not, you're sort of peeling back the layers of who you are. So,
Yeah, so
that's a little unnerving.
So let me just make sure I got that last one right. So you're saying that in a smaller group, it can be more unnerving because there are sort of personal layers that have to be peeled back and so on. Whereas in a bigger group, it can actually be less intimidating because you're just giving something like a more sort of public message or something like that.
It's more that middle group, like with friends who they know who you are, but like in a meeting at work, maybe with new team members, it's a bit of, you know, here's my perspective, and you may not know me, but here's another layer to who I am.
Okay, all right. Whereas, so there can be something else that is something that's more kind of impersonal and just delivering a big thing. Yeah. Okay. So there's really three things then. So there's a kind of impersonal situation, maybe where there's a big message. There's a more intimate setting with friends, and then between them, there's this meeting of people that it's not just impersonal, but they're not your friends, and that's where it's sort of nice here. Yeah. So I'll just call that a meeting. Can anybody say anything else? I won't go on with about this too much longer, but I wonder if we could say anything else about possible ways you might feel discomfort in this kind of speaking.
Really just very rare, somebody very rare, how I might feel.
Yep. So if you guys can read my handwriting, that's great. Most of these are going to help me later if I want to refer to them. But so you said you're more aware of yourself. So you can be discomforted because you're asking, like, is there something in my face and so on. But so the thing is, you're really aware that these other people might be looking at you. That sort of thing. Yeah. Okay, so how comfortable you are with the topic. Yeah, so I'm going to take these before I write that down, just to hold these things in here. So there's three excellent things. Let me write those down. And then I think I want to move on to the next question. So the first one was how well I know the subject matter, how passionate I am about it. The second one was that you can be concerned about keeping people engaged. And the third one was you can be concerned that you're not sure you're actually getting your message across. Sometimes when I'm at the blackboard, I lose my ability to do things like spell. The words that I can normally handle very well, how do you spell that? So I think there's only one C in the cross. Okay, that's good. If I were working at some student paper, I would know that. But I don't know that here. Okay, so that's the first question. So I'm going to use this one over here for another question now. And we're going to come back and talk about these things. But so as I said, I'm going to have three questions in there. Well, they'll come together as you might imagine. I'm prepared with three questions. So the second question I wanted to ask you is now explicitly about sexuality. And I wonder if you would tell me, if people would tell me, I just want to, in a similar sort of way, come up with a list of things that, which are what you hear about sexuality. Right? What are sort of the list of the common views, the things that you grew up hearing, the things that you hear around you in the halls, the things you hear or see on TV. Right? What would you say is the general sort of received story about sexuality? So that's my question here. So maybe we can get to some of that. Yeah.
There are a lot of ways of doing it wrong.
Again, I'm sure it's pretty much impossible for anybody to read this stuff. I'll read that anyway. A lot of ways of doing it wrong. Yeah, what else? What are some other things that are just the general run of stories about sex? Yeah.
Men are sexual monsters for the most part, but women are mildly interested.
Oh, this blue is better.
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, men are sexual monsters, women are mildly interested. What else? Yeah.
You can change it sexuality.
You can change it, so you said?
Yeah.
Can you say a little bit about what you mean by that?
Well, like, I come from the Midwest, and my exposure as a adolescent gay boy was all negative. That exposure, and if you're gay, if there's something wrong with you, you should work at changing it.
I see. You can change it in the sense that you can fix your mistake by virtue of being gay. Yeah. I see. That is something we use. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So it seems that there might be a kind of a cultural difference in how people relate to this. On the one hand, the American attitude may be more silent, more hush-hush to say. The European attitude might be more open about it. What else? Yeah.
Well, kind of, like how it changes. Like I grew up in the South. Gay men, that's not happening. You know what I mean? In Colorado, it's more accepted. You know what I mean? They're more accepted. It's not such a ready to burn you at the stake kind of thing.
Yeah, but so that's a great point. That at least part of the stories we hear in our culture about sexuality focus on issues like that, whether it's okay to be gay or not. And so there could be certain people, or there could even be certain cultures that are more anti-gay. There are other ones that could be more not anti-gay. Right? So yeah, but so that's one of the things that's definitely a living issue. Well, yeah. Yeah. So people are more open about that possibility in women than I bet. Yeah. Yeah.
A lot of two things. A lot of conflicting ideas of what the roles are in sexuality. I mean, the mainstream one is a whole monster thing, but there are a lot of subculture ones that are sort of against that. And if you delve into it, it can be really confusing.
Yep.
And the other thing is it being about sexuality as a tool for status and control and stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to bring out three things. Right. There are. So one thing is that there are different stories. And partially as a consequence of that, it can actually be confusing to confront that. And this last point you made, and I want to ask you about something else you said too, but first, can you explain a little bit more what you were saying at this last point about control and so on? Or still status, you said, status.
Well, in like television shows and stuff like that, you see, men and women using sexuality as like a tool to gain status, especially in like shows I don't watch, like Gossip Girl.
Yeah, so sexuality can be a tool for status. I want to ask you to say a little bit more about one other thing you said, and then maybe other people will pick up on this too. You said this thing about the mainstream view. I wonder if you could say just briefly a little bit more about what that mainstream view is. Or other people could jump in on that, but that's in a way what I'm after. Yeah.
Well, I was always taught I was supposed to be, I was guilt-ridden about sex. It's not acceptable unless it's fruitful.
Yeah, so it's heavily associated with the issue of guilt, and maybe you should feel guilty. But yeah. Anything more about the sort of mainstream story? Yeah.
What I observe nowadays is that women become more active and aggressive when it comes to achieving something. You hear stories everywhere that men are becoming less powerful, and now it becomes more acceptable when woman works and husband sits at home and cares for children. For me, it's kind of disturbing.
Yeah. So so there we have that issue again. So another part of this issue before this is there was this idea that men are sexual monsters and women might be interested. There are lots of other ways too in which we have sort of familiar stories that break down around men having this character, women having this character, and so on. And in that particular case, you were saying that there's a more traditional view that men are going to be more aggressive and women more passive, but in fact there are various ways in which that seems to be changing culturally and so on. Yeah. Yeah, and so I guess I still want to go just a little further with this. I want to move on to the next thing, but I feel like these I guess put it this way: if somebody didn't know what sex was and they heard these answers, I don't think they'd know what sex was. But so so all the things that people here have said are certainly true. It seems to me these are good answers to the accurate answers to the question. What are some parts of our contemporary view? But it feels to me like we haven't really actually talk specifically about sex or about sexuality, right? And so think of it that way. Like if someone didn't know what this subject matter was, right? What's missing there? What would be the mainstream story then?
Well, I keep thinking about the mainstream story because it's a bit glossy, impenetrable. Relating it to your question one, it feels like it's a show. Like the sex that's in our culture that's for consumption is very much exactly that. It doesn't feel like it has any relevance to me as a human being.
Okay, well, can you? Yeah, I mean that's a great. Oh, whoops, yeah, show. So that it's a lot about show, and it has a certain sort of glossy image. But could you say a little bit more about what that image is?
Well, it's youthful. I mean, as a woman approaching 40, it doesn't even feel like it has any relevance for me. It feels very tied to youth.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
I think, especially in our culture, we kind of, put so much glitter on it, but really it's just in a scientific means, it's a sense of reproduction. It's a sense of fitness
Yeah, well, so that's part, I would say, of the, yeah, that's part of the, that's very much one of the issues that gets talked about and debated about whether this is for reproduction or not. On the other hand, there's all this celebration of it, sort of glittery thing, yeah.
Yeah, going back to what you said, you seem like we're kind of touching on it, that we have really defining sexuality for a person that has well. I think that's kind of an answer in itself, because when we ever have a frank discussion of sexuality, we have a lot of sex, and proposals and things like that, they're just going to assume that you already know what it is. Yeah.
Yeah, rare to have frank discussions about it and sort of assume that you know what it is. And so. Yeah. Yeah. Hold on, I'm going to get more from you. Hold on. Women are supposed to be tall and thin. Men are supposed to work out. The standards are impossible. Can you tell me a little bit more? I mean, that's part of what I want to hear. I mean, so those things you said are a good start. Could you fill that out more? What people are supposed to be, what women are supposed to be, what men are supposed to be? Yeah. 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 Want any more of that sort of thing?
Well, just kind of the exploitation of sex and how it deals with that. Because all you've got to do is turn on television, and you'll see the way these gender roles are supposed to be played out. Whether that's on a quote-unquote reality television show on TV, or whether it's on a History Channel documentary, the way things were supposed to be. It's the exploitation of those gender.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, so those things are very, very front on it's interesting as you say on TV or on reality TV, the thing that's supposed to be the opposite of TV. Reality turns out to be much the same.
In light of what those people said, what I see is that the nature of sexuality is being transferred to capitalism. You open up a magazine and you see sexy beaches, you know? I'm like, what? How can the beach be sexy? And on and on and on, you know? How can a car be sexy?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, a couple more remarks, yeah.
To add on to what he says, I agree with him in that the more we get away from sexuality purely for reproduction, the more it becomes a consumer product. You know, it's like we have that. You know, it's like if you're gay, we got this area for you. If you're straight, we got this area for you.
Yeah.
You know, appealing to different markets.
That's a really good point.
There are like clear gender role on the that was the way I think skills here with all of this idea of how one is and this what is really fun tends to be feedback on both sides. Media, illustrated from outside, that's the response to that by gaming the same way we were portrayed as first
Yeah.
love America.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. Yeah.
Going back to what the gentleman said about how we don't have frank discussions
Yeah.
about it, I think it is kind of always a question in the back of our minds, kind of like it's an atmosphere that colors every situation.
That's good. Yeah, so it's permanently at issue, permanently floating around in people's minds. Yeah.
I think that with an emotionalism of sex comes an expectation of what it is because women are sexed up so much in our society to sell sex, and when we're talking about sex sells, I think we're talking about that women's sexuality is what sells.
Yeah, that's good. So one more mark, and then I want to move on to something else. Yeah.
It's like the big issue of like over in Africa, AIDS and everything. Do we tell them to stop having sex abstinence is like, you know, that's the way to go, or is it to provide like knowledge about sex and protection, like how to go about properly doing it without being translating?
Yeah, that's a great point. That's an excellent point. I'm really glad you raised that. That's a very huge topic that comes up. Sex is this thing that is related to AIDS and other things like that. It's related to death, and so all these issues about security comes up, right? And sex starts to look like this dangerous thing. Maybe we should just abstain. Yeah, that's an excellent point. So okay, so that's good. So those are lots of answers to these first two questions. And so now I want to ask you a third question. I won't ask you to tell me your answer. Well, I might, but I'm not officially going to ask you to tell me your answer. So you don't even have to write it down. Well, of course you don't have to, but I'm not even really going to ask you to write it down. But I want you to think about it. I actually want you to actually answer it for yourself, and then we'll see maybe if anybody wants to talk about it or not. But what I would like you to answer for yourself is really what you're concerned about in sexuality. What sex is for you, right? What are you really worried about with respect to sex? What do you think you really want out of it? What do you want it to be? What seems the most sort of intimate and maybe demanding part of it? I guess in a way what I'm asking is, what's the real thing you think about sex that you probably wouldn't want to say? You know, if I was going to ask you to answer the question, like so. Just speaking to your own private self, probably you have these sorts of thoughts and feelings oftentimes, but you might not bring yourself around to actually formulating them. So I wonder about that. If you actually could turn this into a sentence or a claim or a question, whatever, like what are you really concerned about sexuality? What does it really mean to you? What's the thing you want? And that can be anything from you might be thinking about particular practices, particular bits of bodily behavior that you want to be involved in. Or it might be some other kind of thing. So I see hands coming up. Is this because you want to tell me your answer?
No, I have a question. Are you seeing a difference between sex and sexuality?
I'm kind of using those words indifferently. I mean, that's kind of what I'm asking you in a way. Like, what does this thing mean to you? Whatever this issue is that's raised here, what is it that you're after? What's on your mind about it? So think about that. So just think about that question and basically have a serious conversation with yourself for a second about what this thing really means to you. You know, I suppose you saw the talk for this, the title for this talk. Was there something you were hoping to get out of it? So let me talk a bit for a minute now about this, about why I've asked these three questions. I mean, because it seems to me that my sense of so mostly I wouldn't distinguish the word sex and sexuality myself. My sense of that, whatever it is that's contained in those worlds, in those words, is that it's really very much characterized by these three things that I've asked questions about coming together. But it seems to me that on the one hand, the domain of sex is this domain that you're involved in a really charged, personal, and intimate way. You know, there are things you like, there's things you want, there's things you're uncomfortable about. But there are things, in fact, I think in particular, there are things that you could be really enthusiastic about. It could be things that you really want, not just sort of want them, you could really want them. But they're very personal. Right? So that it seems to me, on the one hand, sex has that going on. That it's very much this this thing that touches on something very intimate and very emotionally charged, right, in you. Another thing that's going on in sex is that it's the living out of your sexual life is a situation where you deal with other people. And that's why I really like this remark when somebody over here said this, that speaking in front of people is this unique experience that brings out anxiety, adrenaline, and nervousness. And I think many people would describe that as their experience of lots of things surrounding sex and sexuality, right? So I think there's an awful lot to be understood about sex by looking at this issue of the issues that come up when you relate to other people. And then the third thing is, it seems to me that in our sexual life, we're always dealing with this stuff, right? We're always dealing with this set of answers we get to the story about what this thing is, right? So there's really just, it's like there's three, maybe you could say it's like there's three different authorities that you have to answer to, or three different sources that you have to respond to, right? There's your own intimate feelings and desires. There's these cultural stories that seem in some ways authoritative, and then there's these other people, right? All of these things, all three of these, seem like things that are putting a certain kind of pressure on you to respond to. So that seems to me to be so I mean, that's my reason for asking those questions. That seems to me to be kind of the matrix within which our sexuality develops. I mean, I think your question about, am I talking about sex or sexuality? I think that's a kind of an interesting question that would have made its way onto this board. It could have, because you could have said, part of a common view we have is that sex and sexuality might be different things, right? That sex names some very specific action that might have to do with certain genitals doing certain things, whereas sexuality is something broader. That, it seems to me, I don't know whether that's a fact or not. I don't know whether it's true, but I certainly know that it's part of a familiar story we're told in our culture, right? So when you yourself are trying to deal with what you want this thing to be, you've got an answer that's coming at you from the world that says, well, sex is this one particular thing. It's a word that names a particular action, right? So you've already got a kind of interpretive story coming at you culturally. And that's an interpretive story I don't particularly believe, actually. But, yeah.
You said that there are three authorities you have to answer to: your own, the cultural, and other people.
Yeah.
So would other people be like your close friends, or like classmates, or maybe one person in particular?
I guess the main thing that I was thinking of, I mean, it could be any of those things, but the particular thing I had in mind was that sex is something you carry out with someone else, right? And so that's going to be what's
the other person, so your sexual partner then?
That's more or less what I was thinking.
Okay.
Yeah. But I mean, the issue could be broader than that, as maybe we'll go on to see. But that was the particular thing I had in mind, right? Was that sex brings you into contact with these three interesting things, right? It's not just about you, but it is about you. It's not just about some other person, but it is about another person. It's not just about society, but it also is about that, right? It's responding to these things. So let's proceed with that a bit, and so I have a few things that I want to say to kind of tell you a little bit about what I think about this, which I will do now. But I'd be very happy to have you jump in if you want to tell me that something that I say actually resonates with some topic that you think is important, or you want me to clarify something. But I want to talk a little bit now about the way I think about this. And so, yes.
I'm sorry, before you get started
Yeah.
on that, can I say like that, you said what concerns you? One of these lists, and everybody's talked about it, I think like the biggest concern with them is nobody ever mentioned love. Not a single person said, oh, it's an expression of, love between two people, like, that's
That's good. Let me write that down. Yeah. Actually, let's pursue that for a second. So you said expression of love between two people. Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. And maybe your remark actually suggests to me something that maybe we should do a little bit. So you don't have to tell me what your private thoughts were, but I wonder if now that you've thought about that, if there's things that you think we want to get on this list that we haven't talked about.
I agree that it can be an expression of love. I think more than love is such an abstract concept. I think there's a lot of things where love does not enter the picture
Yeah,
at
yeah,
all.
yeah.
And I think that, at least in my experience, I've had sex for different reasons. I'm in a committed relationship for 3 years now, and sex means a lot more to me than it meant maybe 5 years ago.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, that's excellent. Excellent. Do other people have things they want us to say about this, about other things that maybe should go on our story if we're trying to fill it out? Yeah.
I actually think the concept of, love and being with someone love is encouraged more with women than with men. You know, because with women it's like, oh, it's meant to be, it's love, and with guys it's like, it's like, oh, I like you, quit bugging me. There's not, I mean, it's like when guys open up, they're punished.
Yeah, that's great.
It's like be sensitive, but I'll be that sensitive.
Yeah, that's excellent. So men, so it's the idea that women should be concerned about love is advertised, but men are actually punished in various subtle ways, no doubt, if they actually seem to live out of that kind of attitude.
Exactly.
Was that? I saw that there happened.
Yeah, it seems there seems to be a lot of dichotomy going around the side. Like you're supposed to have 2 people, and they're supposed to have 2 kinds of genitalia. Even if they have one at the same time, then that's kind of acceptable. But if they're ambiguous, then holy cow, that's something that's not even discussed. So it's very focused on the genitalia versus everything else that's happening.
Okay, so I want to write down 3 things there. That's great. So on the one hand, it's focused on two people in the genital story. It's focused on the genitals, and it's particularly focused on unambiguous understanding of what those genitals and so on are. That's great. Excellent points. So that's, I mean, let me just underline that. I think one of the things, what you said there is actually particularly important, and it has to do with my question about the mainstream view. I think in a lot of ways the mainstream view is it's not ambiguous, right? That seems like a really good thing, yeah.
But as I mentioned before, as sex becomes a commodity, and this commodity is being promoted by popular culture, new generations, according to my opinion, get hurt by this. Because, sexuality becomes something, visible. These girls, for example, I'm not trying to point out, but they see these ugly shoes on TV, they think that if they put it on, everyone will look at them. But when I see it, I'm like, Jesus Christ, how ugly it is.
Yeah, I'm just going to write down there the theme of fashion in general is something that comes up with all kinds of issues. So, yeah.
It's kind of amazing too, like how the social factors have changed. Like say the 30s, if you had sex with a girl, you were married her, you know what I mean? But now in say the 2000s, for being a man, like it's promoted getting a, be like a squirrel, get a nut jump. You know what I mean? Just use all of this.
Yeah.
That's terminology.
Yeah.
With public speaking, friendship, all interactions with other people, it's a giving over of our self-identity to someone else. But with sexuality, it seems one of the most intense ways of doing that. Even love is one of the most intense ways of handing yourself over.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
In terms of like love is emotional, the flip side of that is that women who are promiscuous or women who choose to have sex not for the purpose of love are often made to feel dysfunctional. Promiscuity is something that women need to fix where it's encouraged in men, and I think that's really.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so that, yeah, these are excellent points. And so let me just again emphasize this fact that these words like promiscuous, or this idea that you could distinguish sex and sexuality, even the word marriage, right? Those are words, right? They're things that come from a cultural history and a cultural tradition, a language that has been shaped by people. So whenever you're relating to your own sense of sex or sexuality with those words, you are in part, taking on this sort of a prefabricated understanding, right? You're applying categories that they might be good ones. They might be particularly wise ones that have been honed by centuries of human tradition. But whether they're good or bad, you are taking on ways of interpreting that have been kind of handed over to you, right? So a word like promiscuous, right? That's a particular way of describing and interpreting certain kinds of actions, right? So Yeah, but in any case, so these answers are really good, and so I wanted to go back and say something about, I mean, and this will connect directly with the things I've just talked about. Say something about the situation of, well, actually, let me start that sentence again. Imagine you were a little child. So I was saying a minute ago, would these answers be good answers for someone who didn't yet know what sex was? I mean, there is such a thing in the world, right? Those things are born every day. So put yourself back in that situation for it. I mean, of course you can't do it, but try to imagine yourself back. Not so much to when you were born, but when you were a kid. So it seems to me one of the things that's distinctive about children is that they don't really know what this thing is, but they hear about it. Right? When you grow up as a child, you're always hearing about sex, and how could you not when it's on TV, and everything else? You're always hearing about sex, but there's a fundamental way in which you don't really know what that thing is. So think about that interesting situation, and this is a situation you were in, and everybody else in this room was in, right? An interesting situation of the way this question was raised for you as a child, and you didn't even know what people were talking about. On the other hand, you're told a whole bunch of things about it. If I ask you now, well, as I sort of have in some oblique ways, what sexuality is, you got a lot more to go on than a 7-year-old. You can much more lay claim to the idea that you have entered into that sexual realm, and you know what the thing is that people are trying to talk about. But even think about that with yourself. When you say, if you were to say, I know what the thing is, I mean, you know about it in one sense, in that you have a kind of living involvement with it. But that doesn't mean that you know it in the sense that you nailed an understanding of it, right? Or that you have deep insight into it. It can say the same thing about your life. Do you know what human life is? Well, sort of you know it because you do it. So in one sense, obviously you do. But on the other hand, you can ask all kinds of questions about what is it to be a human being, even though you are one. And that's probably what lots of you do when you go to school. Right? So go back to the situation of the child now, and think about that situation, right? Do you know what sexuality is when you're a child? No. But it's a question that's raised for you. And then there are all these answers. And then, just an interesting aside, someone said it here at one point, someone speaking from a more adult perspective said the images of this are all about youth. And that's certainly true, right? That as people get older, sex might be a way, well, it might be something about youth, and it might be something that you desire so that you can think you're youthful. But that's not what it's like for children, right? For children, sex is about adults, right? And I think that's an interesting thing to remember about what that thing is, the different way that thing appears to the perspective of a child. And so with that in mind, then I thought, you might think a little bit about what that dynamic is that happens in you, or that happens in a person as you're growing up, right? As a child, in a way, presumably on the path to entering into that sexual domain, right? So can well, again, maybe people could just say a couple of things about that, about what are some of the things that might stand out in a child's experience, or how that might come up. Yeah.
I'm a little bit confused. Do you make a difference between human nature and human history? Because that's where it gets all mixed up. That's where people, tend to have different opinions. Because I'm trying to recall what Marx said about human nature and human history. He said human history is being made by people. No one creates it. When it comes to human nature, there are some physiological and biological things going on behind the scene, So I'm a little bit confused there.
I'm not. I mean, that's it. The question is good, but I'm not sure what. I don't really understand the connection between that and this, right? So what I'm asking you is, imagine a child, right? Imagine yourself as a child, right? When you're 8 years old, or 4 years old, or 10 years old, you hear people talking about sex. And you hear about it as a thing that adults do, but it's not something that you really understand. And so children are often very wrapped up with questions. What is that? Right? So that's what I'm asking about. I'm asking about that experience, the experience the child has there, and what so I'm looking for people to say just a couple of things about what that child's experience is like. Yeah.
I'm not sure if this is what you're looking for, but speaking from my own experience, it almost seems like I learned about sexuality by more what it is not than what it is. Like, because you constantly see about, like, from a gay perspective, oh, can't you wait till you're old enough to know? Well, you know, to anybody that's in this room that might be different, if I knew when I was, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old that, you look at a boy and you think he's cute and what have you, but you immediately kind of learn that's a wrong view to have.
Yeah.
So you kind of from that kind of,
I want to, yeah, that's great. And I want to in particular hold on to this thing you just said. You recognize it's the wrong view to have. I mean, there's lots of stuff in what you said there, but I want to hold on to that one for a minute. That's a great point. Yeah.
Well, I can't speak for anyone else's experience, but when I was growing up, the first explanation that I got was that it's connected to the way babies are made.
Right.
And so I think immediately there was a connection between, oh, it's why mom and dad are married or something like that.
Yeah. Excellent. So this woman and then Rob.
When I was younger, my parents didn't talk about sex with me.
They said they did or they did not?
They did not.
Yep.
I think they were uncomfortable probably doing it. The first really experience I had with hearing about it was obviously in science class, but then we had a speaker come to my middle school and basically tell us that sex was bad, and they had us sign these little abstinence cards.
Yep.
And so I always had a really negative view, sex was bad for me.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a great point. Yeah, Rob.
well, it's connected with that, but more generally, sex is private.
Is
Private.
right. Right. That's a big thing that you get. Yeah.
That's what it came with.
Yep. Yep.
I can remember, like, talking about what the science you understand. I remember we went to Disneyland and we went in, Minnie's house. We went in Mickey's house and Minnie's dressed. You know what I mean? And everybody in my family's laughing. You know what I mean? And I'm like, where's y'all laughing? You know what I mean?
Yep. Actually, I like that story particularly. So let me just talk for a second about again the thing that's on my mind. So that's a really good example of the child's experience, right? That you come upon something, and you discover that other people see something in it that you don't see, right? And that's kind of the way. That's one of the ways that the sort of mysterious but interesting and important character of this thing is marked out. And that example I think is great. You said you said that's a situation where the older people start laughing at something, and you say, "What are you laughing about?" Right? And that's a really interesting thing, right? Your experience is in that case that you're kind of left out of something, right? And so I guess that actually allows me to say the thing I had in mind, which is that it seems to me that for children, this issue is raised for them, and they don't know what it is. But you're told in all kinds of ways that you should know what it is, and you're going to know what it is. So part of what happens, it seems to me, if you then think about what happens to you as, different people have different histories, but let's say as a teenager or as an adolescent, right? Lots of people get some kind of, really substantial personal involvement in sexual actions with other people when they're teenagers. So, imagine that situation, or even imagine you want that to happen and it doesn't happen. But in either case, imagine you're in that situation where it's sort of when people expect this is going to be happening. And think about what's involved when you then have some kind of sex with somebody. But it seems to me there are a variety of things that come from that. One thing is, you might find it pleasant or not as a kind of feeling, right? So lots of people find it pleasant, and they think, well, that's kind of what this is about. This is why everybody says it's a great thing, because it feels good. Because other people have a bad feeling. Lots of people have really bad experiences. And so then you couldn't so easily come to the conclusion that it's about having a great feeling. But in any case, that's one side of what you experience is that. But another side of what you experience is this. You can feel like, oh, this is that thing that people were talking about. Right? It seems to me that's a really big part of what our sexual experience is when we actually get initiated into sexual action. A big part of why, in a certain sense, you might think of it as a success is because you're now in that thing that you weren't in before, right? And so, you can be and maybe there's another person that you feel like you love or that you're really attracted to in some other way, right? In those situations, You might really feel like you're happy to connect with them. And you might be having some great feeling too, but you also are now succeeding at this thing, right? You're now got there. So what I wanted to think about there was that that's part of the way that these stories become so important, right? The idea that you got there is part of the way that in your sexual experience, you're not just dealing with your own desires, right? You're not just dealing with the other person, but you're also dealing with this whole story, right? You're also grappling with all these expectations, and in particular, your sense, in this story, for example, that now I've made it in a way, right? In some ways, participation in sexual life counts as a mark of growing up, not because of anything about physiology or anything else, but because you're marked as a person who has now got into that zone that you were formerly excluded from. And let me just go on a little bit more about this. So I want to fairly quickly now try to say some things about what I think about this, about bringing together these three ideas. So I said there are these three things happening, and so I wanted to mention that one first as the way that you can see in a bit how what's happening in sex. If somebody tries to tell you that all you're doing is getting a certain kind of pleasure, right? You can see that's not right. You might be doing that, but you're also doing this, right? You're also accomplishing a certain socially prescribed task, right? And it's a very charged experience for people as a kind of, almost like a rite of initiation into adulthood. Something that lets you wear the badge that says, yeah, I do that, or yeah, I did that. And so you can really feel bad about yourself if you get past the age when that was supposed to happen and you actually haven't been able to have sex with anybody yet. Right? You can start feeling like you're a loser because you haven't been able to do that thing. And so that point, I think, allows me to say the second thing that I think is really important about sex, and it's that it's, in an important way, something that you can't just pull off by yourself. And again, if sex were only about the pleasure of orgasm, which no doubt is part of people's sexual life in lots of cases, if that's all it were about, and many stories would tell you that isn't all it's about, then nobody would have any need to seek out other people, because that's a thing you can accomplish by yourself. So the thing about sex is it's got to be involving something more than just that, right? And the thing that seems to be that it especially involves, and this is what how it connects with this idea that you might feel like a social failure if you don't have sex. One of the things that it especially involves is that somebody else has to allow you to have it. You can't make it be the case that you can't ever make it be the case in your entire history that you were able to have a sexual experience with someone. It's not something you can do on your own. You can brush your teeth on your own, but you can't have sex on your own. Like somebody else has to go along with you. And I think that is the point that to me is the most important one. So I'm going to say a couple of things about that to try to bring out a couple of issues here. And I see, by the way, Maria moved over there. Probably she wants to tell me I should hurry up.
No, it's just 5 after 2, and we've got the room until after 2:15, but 2:15
Yeah.
maybe a time when people.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to get something more said in the next few minutes in case people have to flee. But as she says, we have the room longer. So I wanted to think about this issue of other people. I'm just going to talk for a minute. I mean, I could ask you to do this. I could ask you now to say a little bit about what are some of the ways that in sexual life, in sexual action, you depend on other people. And I'm sure you could ask it or answer it. I'm going to quickly give the answers that I have in mind, which I imagine are things people would say if we actually took the time to talk it through. But maybe you will do that on your own. Put a little thought into this. So I think one of the things about it, this again has to do with the difference between sexual, what we usually think of as sexual touching and masturbation, is that you especially want some other person to touch you. Right? Or you can think about just at the level of how you feel about things, feelings in your body and so on. You could think about that issue. But it seems like that is something that people especially the desire the touch of another person, not just because they know it's coming from another person, although I'm going to go on and talk about that in a second, but also because another person can touch you in ways you can't. Right? Part of the thing about touching yourself is that you're always in charge of that. right? You always know what's happening, right? It's like trying to have a conversation with yourself. You know, I mean, it's kind of hard to have an interesting other point of view happen, right? Or play. If you've ever tried to play chess with yourself, like it's just a pastime. It's not really rewarding. But so there's something about the touch of another person that does seem inherently important, precisely because you couldn't do it yourself, right? It's a kind of touching you couldn't accomplish. And so even if you could make those same movements, you know, make the same contact, and you might still like it, but you wouldn't be liking quite the same thing in it. You know, it would be a little bit like the difference between seeing a film unfold where you're constantly presented with a narrative where you don't know what's happening, and then watching the film a second time when you already know how it's going to end. You know, it's not quite the same experience. So that's my first attempt to answer like one aspect of what ways in which we specifically want our sexual life to have other people involved in. But then it seems to me that other ones are maybe even more important. So I was saying before, you can't make sex happen for yourself. Someone else has to consent to having you involved in it. And that, it seems to me, is even more the thing that's charged, right? And the thing that you're getting, right? Someone accepts you. Someone picks you. It's kind of like winning a prize, right? You have been chosen. Right, and that's maybe one of the frustrations. One of the frustrations that in some cases leads people to commit rape. And also one of the reasons why that might be really an unsatisfying thing too. Right? It's out of a certain feeling of your weakness because somebody else isn't choosing you. Right? Or the weakness of having to be chosen. You say, no, I'm gonna be tough, but the fact is you can't use force to get sex out of someone. If sex really means this thing where someone else chooses you. You can hold their bodies down and make them move in certain ways. But that's not the same thing as that experience of being chosen by someone, being accepted and welcomed by someone. And welcomed by someone, in pretty intimate way, welcomed into their body. So I think that to me is to my mind, that is what is really definitive of sexuality. Right? It's the desire to be chosen by another person. And so I think, there's lots to say about sex as it relates to touch, as it relates to your body, as it relates to genitals and all that. Of course, that's tremendously essential to sexuality in all kinds of ways. But if that's all you looked at, I think you would never have been looking at sex yet. Except I think that the thing that makes it sex is that it is this thing that happens between people, where the specific thing you desire is that someone else desire you. Right? The specific thing you desire is that someone else chooses you. Right? And so again, it'd be very different for someone to say consentingly, yeah, I guess you'd like another person to stimulate your body, so okay, I'll do that. I guess, and that's part of prostitution, right? That may be another example of something that's a little bit unsatisfying as a sexual experience. Like someone, you're getting someone else to consent to do something with you, but that's not the same as having the other person actually desire it. Right? So I think if you look at those three examples that I unintentionally used, I didn't have that planned out systematically, but it worked out. Masturbation, rape, and prostitution. All of those obviously have some connection to the world of sexuality, but they all seem like things that don't quite get you the thing that you're after. And that has to do with, well, in a way, what they're all lacking is they're all lacking this situation of one desire desiring another desire, right? So in that situation, whatever you do in your touching, whatever you do in your bodies, no doubt has to do with producing orgasm or producing nice feelings or whatever, but it's doing all that as a communication of this shared desire, right? It's doing that as an expression of a kind of shared desire. So it might or might not be love. You talk about an expression of love between two people, and that could be really important, that could be great and essential. But even if it's not love exactly, that expression of shared desire seems to me essential to this. And that means this word expression. I think that's the key word. I think that's what's happening. And now let me just push that forward a little bit more also. So now so one of the things about this though is that in that situation where you are desiring another person's desire, by which I mean you want that person to desire you, right? The thing you want about them is their desire. You think, I wish you wanted me. There, we really get into these issues about public speaking, right? When you want someone else to desire you, all of a sudden what you've said is, I put myself up for your evaluation. I put myself up for your judgment. So I really like this remark that someone made where she said in speaking, public speaking, she becomes very aware of herself. She said, is there something on my face? Is my hair messed up? But then a couple of sentences later, talking about exactly that point, same point, she said, yeah, because I become aware of these other people who might be looking at me. And I think that way, that two sentences, aware of myself, aware of these other people, right? Those two came up to describe the same thing, right? That's the thing about sexuality. It's the situation where you're aware of this other person in a way that makes you be aware of yourself, because you're experiencing yourself as the thing they're choosing or not choosing, right? You're experiencing yourself as evaluated, judged, scrutinized by that other person. So I think that that's one of the things about sexuality. It is this distinctive domain in which we have a particular kind of self-experience, a kind of self-consciousness, but a very interesting kind of self-consciousnness, right? A kind of self-consciousness which is inherently involved with other people, right? You experience yourself, but you don't experience yourself. I mean, you said this thing about sex being private, and private on the one hand can mean, you do it behind closed doors. But there's another way that people sometimes talk about sex, which I think is mistaken, which is that it's just you privately trying to get good stuff for yourself, where sex seems really self-interested. Well, I think sex is exactly the opposite, right? Precisely what we discover in this experience is that this is where you have an experience of yourself that can't really be held off privately from other people, right? It's where you have this experience of yourself as involved and as actually dependent on somebody else's gaze, on somebody else's desire, on somebody else's judgment. And then it seems to be all these issues come up, right? Like, you're concerned about their engagement when the other person starts nodding off. That's not so good. Like you really care. Am I interesting enough to hold your interest, to keep you there? And you can want to get your message across, right? So the thing is, with another person that you really care about, or that you're really interested in, you really definitively feel the gap between you and that person, right? So you really experience yourself, but you really experience that other person as another person, as other to you, right? And so you can really care about, am I getting through to you? And you can feel intense frustration when you think, like you might think, for example, you should desire me, or you should love me, but you just aren't seeing it, right? And you can feel like you're not getting through. Yeah, I mean, there are various other remarks in here about being judged and so on. So I won't go back and dwell on those things, but again, you could look at some of those things yourself. The last thing that I want to bring out about this other people business, though, and I think I have about 2 or 3 more points to make, which I'll try to make as quickly as I can, but I realize some of you will have to take off. But about other people. So what I'm saying here is that this realm of sexuality, where we desire to be desired by another person, that's the domain where we put ourselves in this situation where we can't control the outcome, right? You can't make it happen. So you really are putting yourself in someone else's hands. And if you're talking about lying around and touching someone in bed, it's literally in someone else's hands, right? Like you really are giving yourself over to someone else. And that means you're vulnerable, right? That means you could lose, you could fail. You could fail in lots of ways. You could fail to be sufficiently desirable. And that would be pretty crippling. That it's like going for a contest and not winning. You put yourself up for this thing, and it turns out nobody picks you. Like that's a rough one. The question was, okay, I like myself. I think I'm a good person. Do I get to participate in that world of happy human life? Do I make the grade? And it turns out you don't get any calls. That's a pretty crippling condemnation, right? It's condemning you. What's it condemning you about? It's condemning you about these most intimate things, right? It's your most personal stuff, and this is kind of what I was asking you about, thinking about what what you want out of sexuality, something really intimate about that stuff. And you in your most intimateness don't matter to anybody. Right? That's pretty big blow. But the second thing is, it's not just about you, right? If you desire that other person's desire, that means you desire them, right? That means you have found them interesting in some way. So another thing about this is, you want to be adequate to that other person, right? So here's another huge dimension to sexuality, and how it works or how it doesn't work, right? One of the things that counts in that situation is you want to succeed at satisfying the other person's desires, not just so that you turn out to be okay, but because you want to be offering something to that other person, right? You care about them, right? So you want their approval. Their approval both for them to say you're okay, but also for them to say, yeah, you were good enough for me. You gave me what you wanted to give me. And then there's this last one, which is again this issue over here about public image and so on. It seems to me that's then another thing that we're grappling with as well. It's not just the eyes of the single other person that we're dealing with, but we are also dealing with a whole bunch of people. So you might think you're privately going to your room to have sex with this other person, but it seems to me that also is typically not true, right? There's a lot of other people in there with us in the way that we bring in this idea of a kind of cultural gaze that we're answering to. So I want to map that out quickly as these issues of vulnerability. And so now I want to say that's where people often undermine their own sexuality, right? Precisely because you feel vulnerable there are kind of escape routes you can deal with to avoid some of that tension. And this, so one, someone said here, men are encouraged not to be intimate and to be sort of monsters. Well, that's one of them. That's one of the most familiar ones, right? You can just be mean. Right? You can lie about sexuality and say, I'm not interested in any of those things. You can lie about it and say, this isn't about dealing with another person. I don't care about what happens, right? And so you can adopt this stance of a kind of purported indifference to the other person, right? And the result of that is that you're very mean to someone, and who presumably, somebody else can be doing the same thing back to you, of course, but as a general attitude, what you're doing is taking this situation and taking up someone else's vulnerability and using the fact that you have the power to be mean just to sort of say no to that person, right? Just to close things down. And you're also in that situation crippling your own possibility for the kind of richness of emotional and shared life that would be available to you. Another attitude you can adopt is in responding to that. You could, for example, so that first person is a person who's really kind of dominating, right? Somebody who just says, this is just about me and a certain kind of pleasure, and I don't care about you. But you could actually take up the flip side of that, and you could become very submissive to that person, right? There's all kinds of ways you could use your sexuality as a way of winning certain kinds of pleasure. And it makes sense if you remember that sexuality is about dealing with another person, right? Because you could then take pleasure by saying, well, I'm able to hold the interest of this person who doesn't have to be interested in me, right? Or I am able to do those things where that person indicates they're getting pleasure, right? So you could take this person who shows indifference towards you, and you could find that rewarding in the sense that you feel proud of yourself for being able to serve that person or something like that. Right, so this is a domain that we could explore in great detail. Of course, other people have, but we could explore this in great detail. Right, the particular kinds of strategies that we adopt for dealing with this issue of navigating our shared vulnerabilities when we don't really want to embrace them. Right, when we back away from putting ourselves in that situation of shared vulnerability. It seems to me that's something that will explain a lot of people's sexual behavior, right? Is that the different strategies that are kind of ways of circumventing the real interactions around this. And so I will just wrap it up by saying what I actually think the conclusion of this is, and this is sort of the answer to this question, why sexuality matters. It seems to me what you really have in sexuality is a situation where you and this other person if you are now in this situation of desiring each other's desire, right, you have this particular kind of intimacy I was just talking about, which is the intimacy where just you desire the other person's desire, they desire yours. That means the things you really desire, your intimate feelings you'd never put on display otherwise, are fair game, right? So one of the reasons why sexuality matters is because it is the thing that is about what is most intimate and important to you, which is going to be different from what's most intimate and most important to me, presumably, right? But it's in that way, it's the thing that is defined by being about the most important personal things. And you have that situation reciprocally with someone else, or at least that's what's on the table as what's open and what's possible. In that situation, just again to repeat something I said from a slightly different angle, you're experiencing the coming together of the thing that's most important for you with the sense of responding to another person. So part of the message of sexuality, in a way, is that the realm of human intimacy is in fact something that is accomplished between people, right? That it's not just single and individual, but it's something where your innermost things will be worked out through someone else and with someone else. And I guess those things, when I say they're most intimate, I'm repeating again this idea that they're the most personal and therefore the most unique. And one of the things that means then is that your sexuality is this domain for you and someone else in the most unique way to define how you're going to live, to define how you're going to be for each other, right? So the thing that I think is most striking about sexuality is that it actually takes us back to the situation of a child. I mean, it sort of vindicates the child's perspective. If it's true what I just said, that the real force of sexuality is this site where we can experience our capacity, without answering to anybody else, to jointly shape our intimate sense of how we want to be and how we want to be with each other, then what you have is an experience of freedom. But freedom in this precise sense that we get to define for ourselves how we're going to be, who we're going to be, which also means we're going to define what our very sexuality is. And so the thing it seems to me that's called for is in a way to return to that child's perspective where you precisely don't know what sexuality is. Right? So what you've been confronted with forever is these stories about what sexuality is supposed to be, what it's about, what it's for, what forms it takes, what's good, and especially what's right and what's wrong. Whereas it seems to me the essence of sexuality is precisely to say that is wrong. Right? The essence of sexuality is it is the domain we exist in, where we have the capacity of experiencing that there is no cultural story that could answer this question for us. There isn't an answer. Right? Your sexuality should be a site for a kind of question where you and someone else are uniquely exploring how you want this to be and who you want yourselves to be. Right? And so sexuality is sort of something you accomplish in a healthy way precisely by rejecting the idea that there was an answer that you were supposed to get to. Right? So it's a particularly nasty thing in our culture, right? That we are so confronted, not just with the specific answers, but with this sense that the thing where you will get it right is when you conform with that answer. Because it seems to me there's no way you could betray sexuality more than that. So there's all kinds of things you could do, right? From what I'm saying, there isn't an answer to the question what the right form should take. You could, maybe you'll be single. Maybe you will be married and settle down with someone. Maybe you'll have many sexual partners. Maybe you'll have partners who have the same body parts as you. Maybe they'll have different body parts. Maybe you'll have all kinds of weird ways you relate to those things. It seems to me there isn't an answer to the question which of those is right. On the contrary, it seems that sexuality is precisely about the openness to define ourselves in different ways, with the result that there's no more correct answer to which of those is right than there is a correct answer to the question, should you be a doctor or a teacher or a musician or a pharmacist or a house husband or a housewife. Right? These are all very, very legitimate human endeavors that can be very fulfilling and satisfying, but they can't be given to you by someone else. And It seems to me that's the same thing with sexuality. So that's my attempt to wrap it up quickly, is just to say that. It seems to me, if you go back and think of those first three things, masturbation, rape, and prostitution, and think about what those things miss, what those things all point to by the way they fall short of the possibilities of sexuality. What they all point to is the way that sexuality is fundamentally the domain of desire meeting desire. It's not about an orgasm, I mean, a part of it. It's not about men versus women. It's about desiring someone else's desire, desiring to be desired. And if you just explore that idea, it seems to me that you can recognize that sexuality is inherently this domain of the mutual creation of a sense of shared identity between people that flourishes precisely when it turns away from the idea that someone else could answer them. So that's my short answer, and I hope that's close to the right.
I'd like to invite you guys to do three things. We have a sign-up sheet circulating for those of you who would like to receive information about philosophy department events. I'd like to invite you to stay if you've got time to ask John more questions, and I'd like to invite you to join with me in thanking our speakers.
Does anybody want one? Well, I guess we'll let people clear out first and see if anybody's thinking I asked people 3 questions. I asked, I talked and then the third question I asked was, and so those first 2 parts, I can't really take conversation for yourself. What are the issues of
I meant to put them there.
Are you talking
that's good, thanks.
Thank you for your contribution.